It started with a knock at the door, and a stranger asking the one question no one forgets. Dare to watch.
Tea was supposed to be a peaceful night, a quiet getaway far from the noise of the city. Just Kristen and James, trying to repair the distance that had grown between them. The cabin looked calm from the outside, surrounded only by open space and silence. But sometimes silence hides things you never expect. Strange details started to stand out the moment they arrived. The porch light flickering, the wind chimes barely moving despite the still air, and a feeling in the air that Kristen couldn't explain. She didn't want to say anything, but something felt off, and tonight someone or something was already watching. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere felt strangely heavy. Kristen and James moved around each other with quiet politeness, both pretending everything was fine. But the night had a way of magnifying silence. Every small sound felt louder, every glance sharper. Kristen noticed a small detail first, a single rose petal on the kitchen counter, even though neither of them had brought flowers. Maybe it was leftover from a past guest, maybe not. James brushed it off, but Kristen felt the same subtle unease from outside slip into the room with them. Something didn't belong here. She tried to ignore it, but that feeling, the quiet whisper of being watched, wouldn't let go. Just past 4 a.m, when the cabin had finally fallen quiet, a single knock echoed through the house. Not loud, not urgent, just unexpected. James froze, trying to decide whether he even heard it. Kristen stepped into the hallway, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the sound itself. They weren't expecting anyone. No neighbors, no friends, no visitors at this hour. They waited, hoping it was a wind, hoping it was nothing. But then another knock, gentle and steady, almost too calm for the hour. Whoever was outside wasn't in a hurry, and that made it even more unsettling. Something told Kristen this night wasn't going to stay quiet much longer. James approached the door slowly, trying to sound confident, even though his voice felt tight in his chest. From the other side came a soft, calm question, spoken by a woman neither of them recognized. The tone wasn't threatening. It was almost polite, which somehow made it even stranger. She asked if someone was home, as if she had the wrong address, but her voice carried a strange quietness, like she already knew the answer. Kristen stepped closer, listening for anything familiar, but the voice belonged to someone they had never heard before. The woman waited, then fell silent. No footsteps, no goodbye, just a stillness that made the cabin feel smaller than ever. After the mysterious knock and the soft voice, the cabin seemed different. Shadows stretched longer than they should, corners darker than before. Kristen and James tried to convince themselves it was their imagination, but something felt off. Every small sound, the creak of a floorboard, the whisper of wind against the window, made them jump. Kristen noticed a shadow in the corner of the room, shifting just slightly, as if it were aware of them. She blinked, and it seemed to vanish. Yet the feeling didn't leave. They weren't alone, and even the silence was full of tension. Something was watching, just beyond their sight. The silence in the cabin grew heavier. Every little sound seemed louder, more deliberate. Then, without warning, the lamp in the living room flickered. Kristen and James froze, unsure if it was a power surge or something else. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching and twisting in ways that made the room feel unfamiliar. Kristen's heart raced as she noticed the movement of a small curtain, though there was no breeze. The unease was rising. Each moment stretched longer, and the cabin that once felt peaceful now felt unpredictable. Something unseen was making them question what was real and what wasn't. Just when Kristen thought the cabin was quieting down, a soft whisper drifted from outside. She froze, unsure if she had imagined it. James strained to listen too, but it didn't repeat. The wind had been still, yet the whisper was clear, deliberate. Both of them felt a chill, as if the night itself was watching. Every instinct told them to check, but fear rooted them in place. The house that was supposed to be their sanctuary now felt fragile, like a stage set for something beyond understanding. Kristen couldn't shake the feeling that eyes, unseen, were just beyond the windows, observing every small movement. As the night grew darker, Kristen and James noticed movement in the corners of their vision. Shapes that shouldn't be there. Shadows that weren't cast by the cabin's warm lights. For a moment, Kristen thought she saw a figure standing near the tree line outside. Then it vanished when she blinked. Another shadow flickered just inside the living room, too vague to recognize, yet unmistakably watching. The air grew heavier with unease. Every creak of the floor and rustle of leaves felt deliberate. They weren't imagining it. Something or someone was there, just out of reach. Every step Kristen and James took felt heavier than the last. From the corners of their eyes, they glimpsed movement again. Shadows just beyond the windows, barely visible through the fog. Shapes lingered in the darkness, sometimes closer than they should have been, then disappeared when they tried to focus. The cabin no longer felt like their refuge. It was a stage where unseen observers tested their nerves. Kristen's stomach tightened with every sound. The wind, the creak of the floor, the distant rustle of leaves. They couldn't see the watchers clearly, but they knew they were not alone. The night seemed endless. Kristen and James tried to calm themselves, but every glance toward the windows made their hearts race. Out of the corner of her eye, Kristen saw movement. Closer this time, just beyond the yard. Two figures, human-shaped but distant, paused and turned, as if aware they were being watched. The porch light cast long shadows, and the fog made everything look slightly distorted. Each second felt stretched, every sound amplified. The cabin no longer felt safe. Kristen's mind raced with questions. Who were they, and how long had they been there? The night was far from over, and the watchers were patient. Kristen's heart raced as she realized the shadows were moving again, not distant this time, but pacing slowly along the edge of the yard, just beyond the porch light. James stayed close behind her, straining to see through the fog that blurred the figures' outlines. Every small movement was deliberate, almost hypnotic. The cabin, once a place of comfort, now felt fragile and exposed. Kristen felt a shiver run down her spine. These watchers were aware of them, patient and silent. Every second stretched longer, the suspense almost unbearable. They couldn't see faces, couldn't hear voices, but the feeling of being observed was overwhelming. The shadows were no longer distant. From the corner of the cabin window, Kristen could see them moving along the porch edge, closer than before. Her breath quickened, and James placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Every sound, the wind brushing leaves, the faint creak of wood, felt amplified. The yard no longer seemed empty. The watchers were near, deliberate, and patient. Kristen's mind raced with questions. Who were they, and what did they want? Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity held her in place. The night had taken a sharp turn from quiet isolation to tense anticipation. Kristen noticed something strange. The wind chimes near the porch moved slightly, though the air was still. A faint shift of a curtain inside caught her eye, as if someone or something had just been there. James followed her gaze, tense and alert, but couldn't see anything clearly. The shadowy figures outside remained partially obscured by fog, their forms barely distinguishable. Yet their presence was undeniable. The cabin, once a safe escape, now felt like a stage for unseen observers. Every subtle movement made Kristen's heart race. Every sound carried weight. They were close, patient, and watching, testing their nerves with every passing moment. Kristen's pulse quickened. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement near the cabin windows. Shadowy figures slowly approaching, careful and deliberate. James moved closer to her, both tense and alert, trying to make sense of the shapes in the fog. The porch light illuminated their outlines briefly, but the figures remained indistinct, almost blending into the night. Each step they took seemed measured, patient, as if they were studying every motion inside the cabin. Kristen's mind raced. How many were there, and what did they want? The night's quiet isolation had become a suspenseful trap, and every second stretched unbearably long. Kristen froze. One of the figures stepped close enough for its outline to become unmistakable, tall, still, and watching. Not hostile, not rushing, just observing. James felt the cabin's silence tighten around them. The dim porch light revealed only shape, not face, leaving their expressions a mystery. The fog swirled around the figure's feet, making the moment feel unreal, like a waking nightmare. Kristen felt the weight of being seen, as if every breath echoed too loudly. The watchers weren't hiding anymore. They wanted to be noticed, and that simple, silent presence was somehow more terrifying than anything else. A faint sound drifted through the silence, light footsteps circling the cabin. Kristen and James froze, listening. The noise wasn't rushed or panicked. It was steady, almost calm, like someone exploring the perimeter. The shadows outside shifted again, drifting behind trees and disappearing into patches of fog. Every small creak of the wooden boards made Kristen's stomach tighten. James moved cautiously to another window, trying to see where the sounds were coming from. But every time he looked, the figures seemed to vanish into the haze. The night around them felt alive, closing in, and the watchers' slow, deliberate movements made everything more unsettling. A soft tapping echoed to the cabin, 3 gentle knocks, spaced perfectly apart, coming from somewhere near the front wall. Kristen and James exchanged a fearful glance. The sound wasn't forceful. It felt intentional, almost like a signal. The fog outside thickened, making the yard nearly impossible to see, but the silhouettes were still out there, occasionally appearing, fading, and reappearing in new places. James stepped cautiously toward the living room, listening for another sound. Kristen stayed close, her breathing shallow. The tapping came again, faint but clear, as if someone was letting them know they were not alone. The watchers weren't trying to break in. They were toying with their senses. The cabin lights flickered softly, dimming for a moment before glowing steady again. Kristen held her breath. The power hadn't gone out. This felt different, almost intentional. James checked the lamps, but nothing seemed wrong. Outside, the fog thickened even more, turning the windows into pale, glowing shapes. Kristen stepped toward the living room window and froze. A shadowy figure stood farther back in the yard, still and quiet, barely visible through the mist. Then another silhouette appeared behind it, just a slight shift of darkness. The feeling of being watched tightened around them. The flickering light wasn't a coincidence. It felt like a warning. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the night were pressing in from all sides. Kristen heard a soft rustling outside, slow, steady, unmistakably intentional. James quietly moved to another window, trying to track where the sound came from. As he leaned closer, the fog shifted, revealing a single silhouette standing just beyond the porch rail. Before he could speak, the shape quietly drifted back into the mist, disappearing as if it had never been there. Then another faint sound echoed near the back of the cabin. The watchers were moving, not rushing, not hiding, but circling. Each step was slow and deliberate, reminding them that they were surrounded. The cabin fell completely silent. No footsteps, no rustling, just a stillness so deep it made Kristen's breath sound too loud. She stepped slowly toward the center of the room, feeling the weight of the night pressing against every wall. James stood beside her, listening. Then, almost in sync, faint shapes appeared outside each window, distant, unmoving figures barely visible through the fog. One near the porch, another by the trees, a third deeper in the yard. They weren't moving now. They were simply watching. The silence was heavier than the noise had been. Kristen felt the air tighten. The message was clear. The watchers weren't finished. Not yet. If the story chilled your blood, just remember, some doors should never be opened, and some knocks should never be answered. The terror of the strangers reminds us how real fear can feel when it comes from the quiet edges of the night. If you want more true horror, real nightmares, and stories that keep you awake long after the screen goes dark, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and tap the bell so you never miss what comes next. Because the next story might be even closer to home.